Hello, this is Zach Weiss, co-founder of Worn and Wound, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the NEOTYPE LM01 Type D. I have no idea what happened to types A through C. If you like this video, find it entertaining, please like and subscribe. It helps us out. NEOTYPE is a new brand from France that was founded by two industrial designers that I believe met in design school. And they've launched their first watch, which I'm holding here right now. And I have to say, first blush, this is quite the first offering from a brand. There's really a lot going on here, a lot of really interesting design. This one stands out from the pack, which is something that I personally, I think, look for more and more in watches, and they certainly achieved that. So what they were going for is something different. You know, I think that's really core to this design principle here. They were not trying to make another vintage-inspired dive watch, another military design, inspired dive watch, certainly something that looks anything like a sub or a 50 fathoms. None of that is here. They really started from scratch, and they're inspired by, I think, a world of designed objects. These are industrial designers, and that's sort of in their pitch. They're looking at everything around them. And I personally think there's some really interesting references here to some 90s design that we haven't really seen come back very much recently, and that is Blobism. So that might not sound like the greatest thing on earth, but in the 90s, you saw a lot of like soft forms come out. This was really kind of stimulated by better CAD software, products that were usually made in plastics and bright colors. iMac sort of famously sort of Blob-y, the original one, but it also went to architecture, vehicles, and everything else. And it's just defined by soft forms. The name Blob doesn't sound great, but you think organic soft forms, and it's kind of it's an intriguing design concept, and certainly not something that we have seen return recently. I don't know if this is what they're looking at. This is what I associate this with. But with kind of all things 90s making a comeback, I was actually kind of pleased to see some of that here. So let's just get right into it. So this case is a 40 millimeter case that's 50 millimeters long and 15.8 millimeters thick. And that is thick, but I'll get to how that is sort of broken up in interesting ways in a minute. The Sapphire Crystal on here, which is domed, is 3.5 millimeters thick. So that's a really chunky sapphire. It also has 5 layers of anti-reflective coating on it. And the watch itself is a 300 meter water resistance screw down crown on that as well. So this is a solid watch, and it feels solid. That's one of the also first things I thought about when I took this watch out of the box they sent it in, was like, this thing is a brick, which is always reassuring with a 300 meter dive watch. So now we're going to get into where this sort of blobbiness sort of makes its head, and that is really in the soft forms of the case. If you look particularly down the sort of center line of this case, you'll see that the side rounds up and then comes up over this really intriguing bezel design. So all of this is soft. And this bezel, which, typically a bezel is sort of flat and facing you, this one's rounded and sort of away from you. So the numbers are sort of pointing out. They're still totally visible from above, but they sort of point away. And you have these little notches in here, which sort of like protrude from this form. It's very organic. Something I really haven't seen a watch quite like this. And rather than being weird, it works. Like, there's still something very toolish about this. There's still something very kind of strong and bold and sporty about it. It's another reference, another kind of 90s reference I'd make is like, it's a bit like Oakley sunglasses, but if they were cool. Some of them were cool, but this is like if it was genuinely kind of cool and didn't kind of get a little too dorky or something like that. But it's really cool and sporty, and I like how it feels too. I mean, these little notches grip your fingers. You turn it, 120 click bezel, quite loud. If you're into a loud bezel, they got that for you. Loomed here up at 12. Just a really cool case design. And that rounded edge really also makes its way to the case back as well. The case back is very, very soft. It features this bold X pattern on it, which is used for, obviously a tool grip. Their logo is this X as well, so you'll see it on the bezel. I think that's meant to be kind of minimal and neutral. But overall, I'm very impressed by this design. It really feels out of the box, and the craftsmanship on it is also fantastic. There's different finishes that the watch comes in. They're all bead blasted. Obviously here I have steel and black PVD, but there is also a gold PVD for sort of a lighter champagne color. I'm not 100% sure why they stuck purely to the matte finish, but I do think it works really, really well with this geometry. I think brushing could have been funny. Polish would have been reflecting the whole room back at you. That said, I think they also could play with that, because I'd be curious to see basically some other finishing options, but this does look good, and you know, I think more toolish for it. Getting into the dial is much more straightforward, more aggressive, I'd say, in its design elements, but distinctive, and I think also quite attractive. There's definitely a little bit more of like a military feel to it as well, something more tactical. So you have a matte black dial. It's a sandwich construction, so underneath that is then a plate of lume. And you have, you know, the 12-hour markers here. You have lines at the cardinal points, doubling up at 12. This like gives it sort of an organically crosshair sort of feel, something I always appreciate. And then you have dots in between. There's then a chapter ring around the edge. I found this dial is actually exceptionally dark black. Under the strong lights here, I think you're probably seeing a lot of definition, but in actual use, I found that it just looked like a single matte inky black surface. When you see it under strong light, you do see there is a thin line that is depressed into the dial that's separating the chapter ring from the sort of central area, but I didn't really see that very much outside. Additionally, the hands here are the hour and minute hands are just fence posts, and the second hand is like a lollipop hand, but they're all coated in matte black. And once again, in most settings, I really only saw the lume. It almost has like a Vanta black sort of feel to it, where everything just feels sort of like it's floating over the dial. Obviously, Vanta black is much darker, but you get this sort of effect of the hand, like the meat of the hand sort of disappearing. I quite like this look, and I think it works surprisingly well with the kind of strange case, which, you know, I think would have been a bit of a challenge potentially to kind of find what exactly fits this, while it's also different, you know. Like I said, they didn't go for those sort of classic dive watch cues. You know, you don't have the triangle at 12 and the applied circles. It's different, but it works. Powering the LM01 Type D is the Miyota 9039, which is you know, very similar to the Miyota 9015. Is the date-free version. It's 24 joules, beats at 28,800 beats per hour. It's around 40-hour power reserve. At this point, I think this is considered a very reliable movement, and certainly my own experience, it has been a very reliable and solid movement. On the wrist, the LM01 Type D has a lot of presence. So it's a big watch, it's thick, it's muscular, and it's pretty bold as well. It's 40 millimeters, which I said before, but this is like the biggest 40 millimeter watch I've personally ever worn. You know, there was a time when a 40 millimeter diver was quite rare, and I was always, you know, very excited to see it. It felt like this Goldilocks size. Now they've gotten used to watches that are smaller than that, frankly. 40 is closer to that upper limit, and this one just feels big. And I think that's partially because of these, you know, simply the amount of metal you have here. There's just a lot of like flat metal surfaces. The crown guards are quite thick. The bezel's quite thick, but it's also 50 millimeters long, which is pushing it, at least on my 7-inch wrist. And it's quite a flat watch in terms of the lugs. So the lugs themselves don't curve down over the wrist very much. They sort of span the top of the wrist. So I think it's fits, but this is probably about at the limit of what I'd like to see from this. But in terms of just the look and the design, I mean, this thing is just, I think, really cool, really unique. Once again, it's modern. It's a little bit 90s in the ways I kind of explained before, but it's certainly unique and fun and toolish. I don't know. I find it quite appealing looking. In terms of the height, so like I said, it's 15.8 millimeters tall. But when you look at it on the wrist, particularly in profile, a lot of that height gets sunken into the case back, which sits really like in my wrist quite well. So I think that immediately kind of eliminates some of the height. And then because it's not slabby at all, everything rounds and the whole thing tapers, that does give it just a sense of being actually thinner than it really is. I wouldn't say this wore like a thick watch at all. 15.8 is thick. I would say this wore or felt more like a 13 millimeter watch, which is much more kind of a standard sort of tool watch thickness. In terms of the straps, it comes on a rubber strap or a nylon strap, which you see here. This is like a a strap that they designed for it. It's a quick release strap. I think it looks really nice. The 22 millimeter lug span might be a little wide for me on a 40 millimeter watch. I feel like that is part of what gives it such a kind of a bold presence as well. It sort of has wide shoulders, if you will, which just makes the whole thing look a little bit thicker, like visually not tall, but thick this way on the wrist, and more aggressive. Perhaps more of a taper in the strap might have helped that as well. I also think given the organic feel of this design, there was a really good opportunity to do a fitted or integrated sort of lug strap here. Not a lug, sorry, so that the rubber strap itself would fit between the lugs perfectly and sort of fill that gap. I feel like that could have worked really nicely with the sort of organic flow that they have going on in the case. The watch is quite hefty, as I mentioned before, and once again, I feel like there's an opportunity. It's not distractingly hefty, but you feel it. So I'd kind of like to see a titanium version of this watch as well. I just think that something like that could really kind of add into the comfort level, make it feel a little bit smaller too. So the only thing I haven't talked about yet is the price of the LM01 Type D by NEOTYPE. And as you could guess, it's actually a very, very reasonably priced watch. So the prices, though, are a little confusing because they're in euro and with VAT, so I'll do my best to do all the conversions here. The steel model is 730 euros, and that includes VAT. So I did the math right. That is around $614 without VAT at the time of this recording. The PVD then comes at a little surplus, so 780 euros or 656, once again, USD without VAT. So, you're talking in the $600 range, mid $600 range. This is, I think, a lot of watch for that money. Once again, the build quality on this thing, like you could hammer nails with this almost literally. It is really, really solid. It is quite unique. It is aggressive. This is not going to look like any other watch you're going to stumble across. I think they did just a really fantastic job coming out of the gate with this design. And if you're watching this in June or July of 2022, they also have a Kickstarter campaign going. It ends mid-July, so you'll actually be able to get an even better deal than that at that time. Yeah, once again, I think I'm just really excited for what NEOTYPE has done here. And I think there's a lot they can do with this format. Love to see a smaller one, love to see a titanium one, love to see a chronograph version. They just have a really nice format here, and moreover, clearly a really unique vision for what a watch can be. So looking forward to seeing more from NEOTYPE. If you'd like to learn more about the NEOTYPE LM01 Type D, please head to warnerwound.com and check out my full hands-on article there. Thank you.